My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 78 years old, and I live in a small town in rural Ohio. My house is simple, made of light wood, surrounded by a garden I have always tended with care, even when my hands trembled from holding the hoe for too long. The bird's song is my alarm clock every morning, and the aroma of fresh coffee is my greatest luxury. Many people in the neighborhood see me as a quiet, always smiling lady who greets everyone who passes by on the sidewalk. But inside me, there are days when I carry a weight nobody would imagine. Old age is silent, and behind the smiles there are memories that refuse to stop hurting. My only son, Richard, 56 years old, is my greatest pride, or at least he once was. I raised him almost entirely on my own after my husband died in a car accident when Richard was just 10. I worked as a seamstress, embroidered for neighbors, mended clothes for wealthy people who hardly ever looked me in the eye. Every penny that came into the house I saved carefully, thinking of my boy's future. Richard grew up, studied, graduated in business administration, and built his own life. At least that's what I like to believe. Today he lives in a larger city, but he visits me a few times a month. He always arrives in a hurry, with a cell phone in his hand, as if he never has enough time for me. At first I didn't mind. I thought, it's modern life, he has responsibilities, commitments. But over time I noticed the conversations had changed tone. He almost never asks about my health, my feelings, or how lonely I feel in this house. Instead, he always finds a way to mention my savings, the house, the land I inherited from my parents. "Mother, have you thought about how you're going to divide your assets?" he asked me once while I was serving tea in the parlor. "Richard, why are you in such a hurry?" "I'm still alive," I answered, trying to smile. He just laughed, but that laugh made me uncomfortable, as if something was being hidden beneath it. The neighbors sometimes comment on how Richard seems distant, cold. I always defended my son, saying he was just too busy. But inside my heart a doubt began to grow, like a shadow that was hard to ignore. One cold November night, while I was preparing a pot of vegetable soup, I heard Richard talking on the phone in the hallway. He didn't know I was nearby. His voice was low, but it carried a strange weight. "Yes, I know, when she's gone, the house will be mine. I just need to wait a little longer." My heart stopped for an instant. The shock was so strong I almost let the pot fall from my hand. I felt as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet. My own son, the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth for, spoke of me as if I were only an obstacle, an expiration date. I stood behind the door, my heart racing. Richard hung up and came into the kitchen, smiling as if nothing had happened. "What's wrong, Mother? You look pale." "Nothing, Richard, just tiredness," I lied, swallowing hard. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, reliving every moment I had bent myself to give him the best. The nights without eating so he could have a full plate, the clothes I stitched late into the night, the dreams I set aside. All of it seemed now worth nothing. But instead of crying, I fell silent. In that silence something began to stir. A different feeling, almost like a strength I didn't know I still possessed. The next morning, when I got up, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Deep wrinkles, tired eyes, but there was something new there, a determination. I could not let Richard continue believing I was only a passport to an inheritance. And it was at that moment I decided I needed to watch more to be absolutely sure before I acted. After that night when I overheard Richard on the phone, I spent the following days in silence, watching his every word and gesture. It was as if my eyes had finally opened. Before, I had seen my son with a mother's heart, always ready to excuse his mistakes, willing to see only his virtues. But after that discovery, every detail seemed to scream a cruel truth I did not want to accept. Richard cared only about what I would leave him when I was gone. He stayed at the house for a few more days. I kept cooking his favorite meals, apple pie, chicken stew. But now there was an invisible distance between us. The silence at the table felt heavy. I wondered whether he noticed how much his words had hurt me. On a Sunday afternoon, the sun hiding behind the trees, Richard pulled up a chair and sat across from me in the parlor. He held a leather folder, and his expression was far too serious for a simple visit. "Mother, we need to talk," he said without preamble. My heart raced. I took a deep breath, trying not to show the turmoil inside me. "About what, Richard?" He opened the folder and took out some papers. "I've been thinking, you're already 78. Don't get me wrong. I only want to make sure everything is organized for when the time comes." The coldness in his voice cut me like a knife. He spoke of my death as if it were a mere administrative detail. I tried to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "Richard, are you worried about my well-being or only about what will be left afterward?" He lifted his eyes, somewhat impatient. "Mother, please, don't dramatize. I just want things to be clear. The house, the land, your savings, all of that can cause confusion if there's no proper will." Those words landed on me like stones. My chest ached, and at the same time a flame of indignation began to burn. "Do you think I am nothing but that? An inheritance waiting to be divided?" I asked, my voice trembling. Richard sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I didn't say that. But let's be honest, Mother, you're not going to live forever." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at him, trying to find in his eyes the little boy I had carried in my arms, who ran through the garden with scraped knees and an open smile. But what I saw was only coldness, greed. "Richard, have you stopped to think that while you wait for my death, I'm still living? Feeling? Suffering?" My voice broke at the end of the sentence. He looked away, impatient, and put the papers back in the folder. "I'm only trying to be practical, Mother. One day you'll thank me for this." I rose slowly, supporting myself on the arm of the chair. Each movement seemed to carry the weight of age, but also an invisible strength that was beginning to rise within me. I walked to the window, looked at the garden lit by the orange glow of the evening, and took a deep breath. Inside, my heart screamed. I wanted to cry, to shout, to ask where the love I had given him had gone. But I swallowed it all in silence. Maybe because, deep down, I already knew that one day I would have to make a hard decision. That night, after he retired to the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen. The clock read almost midnight, and the tick-tock was the only sound in the air. I held a cup of hot tea in my trembling hands and remembered the nights of sacrifice, when I sewed until my fingers bled, just to ensure Richard had a better future. All of that for what? I thought. So that decades later, my own son would look me in the eye and remind me, with no shame, that I would not live forever. I felt a mix of pain and anger burning inside me, and it was in that moment that something changed. I knew I could not remain silent. Richard had opened a deep wound, but he had also given me the clarity I needed. My son no longer saw me as a mother, but as an inheritance. And so I made a silent decision. I needed to be absolutely sure how far he would go for that money. The following days felt like carrying a stone in my chest. I watched Richard move about the house and no longer saw my son. I saw a stranger. With every gesture, every word, it seemed that everything I had heard in that cold, cruel conversation only gained more weight. I began to observe in silence as one studies a hidden enemy. He kept visiting, but now there wasn't even an attempt to hide his intentions. He asked about documents, bank accounts, the lot behind the house. It was as if my life had been reduced to numbers, contracts, and sums. But the deepest wound came one Wednesday afternoon. I had gone out to the porch to water my flowers when I heard Richard's voice in the backyard. He was on the phone again, and this time he made no effort to be discreet. "No, you don't understand. This house is practically mine already. We just need her to sign a few papers. It's only a matter of time." My heart tightened, and my hands shook so badly I almost dropped the watering can. "This house is practically mine already." The words echoed inside me like hammers. Richard spoke of me as if I no longer existed, as if I were only a shadow occupying a space that would soon be his. I went back inside, shut the door, and sat in the armchair in the parlor. My hands covered my face, and the tears slid down without my control. I, Margaret Thompson, who had fought so hard in life and never feared hard work, was now there, humiliated by my own blood. I remembered the nights I stayed awake sewing clothes for the wealthy ladies in town. I embroidered until my eyes burned while Richard slept peacefully in his room. I sacrificed without a second thought because I believed I was building a better future for him. I also remembered the birthdays when I skipped buying something for myself so he could have the present he wanted. All of it now seemed to have been tossed to the wind. That night I sat on the edge of the bed and thought of my husband, Thomas. If he were alive, maybe things would be different. Maybe Richard would have had a firmer hand, someone to remind him of the value of gratitude and respect. I missed his embrace, his wise advice that always calmed me. But now there was only me alone, facing my son's coldness. In the quiet of the bedroom, I decided I could no longer deceive myself. The Richard I had known had long since disappeared, and in his place remained only a man consumed by greed. Still, a small hope persisted inside me. Maybe it's only a phase, maybe he'll come to see the value of a mother's love again. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The next day, Richard appeared in the kitchen while I was making coffee. He seemed anxious, restless. He sat at the table, crossed his arms, and stared at me. "Mother, have you thought about selling the lot and back? It's good for nothing. We could invest, multiply that money." I gripped the cup so hard I feared I'd break it. I looked into his eyes, trying to find a trace of humanity, but all I saw was calculation and coldness. "Richard, that lot belonged to your grandfather. It's part of our history. It's not just about money." He sighed and shook his head as if I were a child being unreasonable. "History doesn't pay bills, Mother." I felt such a deep pain that I could hardly breathe. My own history, my legacy, my memories, all reduced to figures. In that instant I realized I needed someone I could trust, someone who could help me see a way out. I could not face this battle alone. That night I wrote in my diary, something I had not done for years. My son no longer sees me as a mother. To him I am a walking will. But I will not allow myself to be treated this way. If he thinks he knows me, he is mistaken. I still have the strength to surprise him. I closed the diary and tucked it into the back of the drawer. For the first time in a long while, I did not cry. There was pain, yes, but also a seed of something new. A decision was beginning to germinate. And I knew that before I acted, I needed to be absolutely sure how far Richard would be willing to go for that money. The days that followed were a torment. Every word of Richard's echoed in my mind, as if my own heart were being crushed. I tried to stay calm, to smile, to pretend nothing was happening, but inside me the world was no longer the same. My son no longer spoke like a son. He spoke like an heir. One Saturday morning I woke early to make pancakes, an old habit I'd always kept, perhaps out of nostalgia. While I stirred the batter, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Richard came into the kitchen, his face drawn, a leather folder under his arm. "Mother, we need to talk about serious things," he said. No greetings, not even noticing the sweet aroma spreading through the air. I drew a deep breath, trying to control the anxiety growing inside me. "What is it now, Richard?" He opened the folder and spread some documents across the table. "I've been talking to a broker. This house is worth much more than you think. If we sell now, before the market drops, we could get a great price." Sell. The word hit me like a punch to the stomach. This was the house where I had lived with Thomas, where I raised Richard, where every corner held a memory. And he spoke of selling it as if it were an old piece of furniture, unimportant. "Richard, this is my home. I don't intend to sell anything," I answered firmly. He looked at me impatiently. "Mother, you don't understand. It's not safe for an elderly woman to live here alone anymore. Think about the future. Think about me too. Think about you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Are you worried about me or about the money this house could give you?" He didn't answer immediately. He just stared, jaw clenched, eyes cold. Then, without disguising it, he said, "I won't lie. That money could change my life. I worked hard all these years, but I haven't gotten where I wanted. With this inheritance, I can finally have what I deserve." My heart ached. He spoke of inheritance while I still breathed. He spoke of deserving it as if it were a reward for enduring my presence. I tried to change the subject, but Richard persisted. He did the math, scribbled figures on a sheet, showed graphs on his phone. The more he talked, the more I realized that to him I was merely an obstacle, an inconvenient detail that needed to be resolved. At the end of the afternoon, as he prepared to leave, he said something I will never forget. "Think carefully, Mother. You may resist now, but one day you'll have to give in. I'm only trying to speed things up." I closed the door behind him with trembling hands. The silence of the house seemed to crush me. I walked to the parlor and sat in the armchair, trying to catch my breath. His words spun in my head like a curse. That night I dreamed of Thomas. In the dream he looked at me with his kind eyes and said, "Margaret, you must not let yourself be defeated. Show him you still have strength." I woke with tears in my eyes, but also with a decision growing clearer. I could not remain idle any longer. In the following days I continued to pretend. Richard called often, always insisting on the same topics. The will, selling properties, dividing the estate. I answered evasively, letting him believe I was just a frail, indecisive old woman. But inside I watched every detail, how he spoke, how he looked at me, how his patience shortened each day. I noticed something even crueler. He was already speaking with others about what he would do when I was gone. A neighbor, Eleanor, who always brought me fresh bread, told me she had seen him in the market talking to an acquaintance. He was saying he'd soon inherit his mother's big house, she said, her expression worried. I felt a chill run down my spine. So it wasn't just me. Richard was already spreading his greed through the town, as if my death were an event penciled onto a calendar. That night I wrote again in my diary. My son no longer sees me as a mother. To him I am an obstacle between him and the money, but I still have a voice and he will hear it. I don't know how, but I must act before it's too late. The wind rattled the windows, and the house seemed to creak as if sharing my pain. I lay down, but sleep would not come. I could only think of the next step, certain that Richard was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The morning after my silent outpouring, I woke more tired than when I had gone to bed. The weight of Richard's betrayal seeped into my bones like a slow poison. I rose with effort, set water to boil, and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. As the steam rose from the cup, I heard soft knocks at the door. It was Eleanor, my longtime neighbor. A woman with neatly combed gray hair, a steady gaze, and a warm smile. She carried a basket covered with a floral cloth in her arms. "Good morning, Margaret. I baked some fresh bread, and thought you might like a few." I smiled, trying to hide the storm within me. "Oh dear, you're always so thoughtful. Please come in." We sat in the kitchen. While spreading butter on the still warm bread, Eleanor studied me in silence. "You look weary, my friend. Is something going on?" For a moment I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep the secret, not expose the shame of being treated as a burden by my own son. But there was something in her gaze, a mix of tenderness and strength, that gave me courage. "It's Richard," I began, my voice unsteady. "He no longer sees me as his mother. He only speaks of inheritance, of selling the house, of dividing what is still mine. Just yesterday, he said I should think of speeding things up." Eleanor slowly set her cup down on the table. "Margaret, this is serious. You cannot ignore it. Richard is crossing dangerous lines." "I know, but what can I do? He's my son." She held my hands firmly. "Precisely because he's your son, you suffer more. But you are not alone. I know an honest lawyer, Mr. William Harris. He's helped other widows in the community protect themselves in similar situations. Perhaps he could advise you." The idea frightened me. To seek a lawyer against my own son? It felt like admitting that a mother's love had been defeated. Yet at the same time, a voice inside me insisted I needed to take action before it was too late. I accepted the contact. Eleanor offered to arrange the first meeting. "Don't worry, Margaret. You don't need to decide anything now. Just listen to what he has to say." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, but my mind churned. The image of Richard with his papers, his cold voice saying, "It's only a matter of time," haunted me. I closed my eyes and imagined Thomas at my side, whispering, "Protect yourself, Margaret. Protect what we built." 2 days later, Eleanor accompanied me to Mr. Harris's office. It was a simple brick building in the center of town. The lawyer was a man in his 60s, calm in speech and sharp in gaze. He rose to greet us with a firm handshake. "Mrs. Thompson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Eleanor has told me a little already. I'd like to hear it from you." I sat across from him, my heart pounding. I recounted every detail. Richard's cold words, the pressure, the phone calls, the comment at the market. Harris listened in silence, jotting everything down in a notebook. When I finished, he sighed and adjusted his glasses. "Sadly, your story is not uncommon, but you still hold power over your estate, and you can, if you wish, take steps to protect yourself." "What kind of steps?" I asked, uncertain. He explained about conditional wills, lifetime gifts, charitable funds, and clauses that could restrict Richard's access to the inheritance. You could even stipulate that he only gains access if he fulfills certain conditions, such as caring for you until the end or taking part in charitable work. A spark lit within me. For the first time, I felt as though I held a weapon against Richard's coldness. "But what if he finds out?" I asked. Harris smiled faintly. "Then he'll know you are not as fragile as he thinks." I left the office on shaky legs, but with my heart beating stronger. Eleanor held my arm. "See, you're not defenseless. You can still turn the tables." On the way home, the cold December wind bit at my face, but I felt more alive than I had in weeks. There was pain, yes, but also a new feeling, hope. That night I wrote in my diary, "Today I met Mr. Harris. He showed me that I still have power, that I can still protect what is mine. Richard thinks he knows me, but he has no idea what I'm capable of." I closed the notebook with steady hands. For the first time, I did not cry before sleeping. Yet a darker thought haunted me. If Richard was already impatient, how would he react when he realized I would not be as easy to bend as he imagined? The days that followed Mr. Harris's visit felt like living in two worlds. Outwardly, I kept being the fragile, smiling lady who served hot coffee and pretended not to notice her son's coldness. Inside, however, something had changed. I now had a secret, a plan that might turn the tide. Eleanor, always attentive, came to see me almost every day. We talked about trivial things, but there was a sense of complicity in our looks. She knew my silence hid something bigger. Sometimes her mere presence was enough to keep me from falling apart. Richard, for his part, seemed more and more impatient. He called me almost every morning in a dry voice, asking if I had thought about selling the lot, making a will, getting things in order. I answered evasively, feigning frailty, and noticed how that irritated him. He wanted speed. He wanted me to be an easy piece to manipulate. Then, on a cold Friday in December, he announced he would come to dinner. "Prepare something special, Mother. We have a lot to discuss." That phrase echoed in my mind all day. I knew it would be a decisive night. I spent the afternoon preparing a simple but carefully made meal. Roast beef, sautéed vegetables, and for dessert, my apple pie, the same one he loved as a child. While I cooked, I remembered the little boy who used to run into the kitchen begging to scrape the batter bowl. Where had he gone? When the clock struck 7, I heard the car pull up. Richard entered the house impeccably dressed in a dark suit and red tie, carrying that damned leather folder again. "Good evening, Mother," he said, kissing my cheek mechanically. "It smells wonderful." We sat at the table. He ate in silence for a few minutes, then set down his cutlery and stared straight at me. "Mother, we need to talk seriously. We can't put this off any longer." I breathed deeply. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Richard?" He opened the folder, took out some papers, and placed them in front of me. "Here is a draft contract to sell the house. The broker is confident he can close quickly. If you sign, we'll have the money in less than 3 months." I looked at the papers as if they were daggers on the table. "Richard, how many times do I have to say it? This is my home. I do not intend to sell anything." He sighed, visibly irritated. "Mother, you're not thinking clearly. This house is too big, too old, too expensive to maintain. And frankly," he paused, his cold eyes fixed on mine, "you won't be around to enjoy it for much longer." I felt the floor slip away beneath me. My own son spoke of my death, as if talking about the weather. "How can you say such a thing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am your mother, Richard. I am still alive." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I know you're alive, Mother, but we have to be realistic. Sooner or later, all of this will be mine. I'm just trying to get ahead of it. Make it easier for both of us." A quiet fury took hold of me. My hands shook, but not from weakness, from indignation. "You speak as if I were an obstacle, as if I were a burden you need to get rid of." Richard said nothing in reply. He only looked at me, cold and calculating. Dinner ended in silence. He barely touched the apple pie. Before leaving, he said in a threatening tone, "Think carefully, Mother. Don't make things harder than they need to be." When I closed the door behind him, my legs gave way. I leaned against the cold wood and cried as I hadn't in years. But amid the tears, a certainty grew. I had to act quickly. That night I sat before my diary and wrote. Richard made it clear. He doesn't see me as a mother. He sees me as an obstacle. But he forgets who I am. I am not just a frail old woman. I still have the strength to surprise him. And I will. I turned off the light, but sleep did not come. His words echoed. Sooner or later, all of this will be mine. They drummed in my head. Yet instead of paralyzing me, they began to strengthen me. I knew the battle had only just begun. And if he wanted to see fragility, that was exactly what I would show, until the right moment to reveal my true card. The Monday morning dawned with a thin cold that cut the skin and made the porch boards creak. I woke before the sun, as if the house's very silence had pushed me out of bed. I made strong coffee, ate a piece of toast without tasting it, and stood for a few minutes in front of the window, looking at the lawn covered by a veil of frost. That morning I had one goal: to return to Mr. William Harris's office and take the next step. I put on my blue wool coat, the same one Thomas bought me during our last winter together. As I adjusted the scarf around my neck, my fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from anticipation. I grabbed my bag, turned off the lights, and locked the door with an almost ceremonial care. I needed everything to look normal, with no clues for curious eyes. I called Eleanor while still on the doorstep. "Can you drive me to town?" I asked in a whisper. I can, Margaret. I'll be there in 10 minutes. And don't worry. No one needs to know where we're going. She arrived in the old gray sedan, discreet as always. The engine purred low, and the lavender scent she used to freshen the seats gave me a childish comfort. We spoke little on the way. I watched the farms pass slowly by the windows and counted the telephone poles as if they were milestones of courage. 1, 2, 3. When we turned the corner onto Main Street, Eleanor slowed the car. Do you think Richard might suspect? I asked without looking at her. I think he suspects everything already, dear. But suspecting is different from knowing, she replied, with that steady calm she alone possessed. Mr. Harris's brick building looked smaller that morning, but no less solid. We went inside. The secretary, Mrs. Cole, smiled kindly and led us to the office. The room smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. On the shelf, worn-covered books. On the desk, a green banker's lamp that threw a halo of seriousness over the documents. Harris stood, shook my hand respectfully, and motioned for me to sit. Mrs. Thompson, how have you been these past few days? With a heavy heart but determined, my voice came out firmer than I expected. I told him about the dinner, the folder on the table, and Richard's cutting words. Harris's eyes narrowed, attentive, while Eleanor, beside me, kept her fingers intertwined as if holding an invisible thread of courage. Are you ready to formalize measures? Harris asked. We can draft a will with restrictive clauses, and if you wish, make gifts during your lifetime to institutions you respect. We can also appoint an independent executor, someone you trust, to ensure your wishes are carried out. I want everything that will secure my dignity, and I want Richard to understand that love is not imposed by a will. Harris nodded, took a pen, and began to explain the options with clarity. We decided on 3 actions. A conditional will, stipulating that Richard would only receive a portion of the estate if he met requirements for cohabitation and care, verified by third parties. A donation fund for the local library and the town's elderly shelter, created in Thomas's and my name, with part of the back lot tied to it. A durable power of attorney for medical and financial matters, placed in the hands of someone I trusted, and there I looked at Eleanor, who widened her eyes in surprise. Me, she whispered. If you accept, yes, I replied. You know my heart better than anyone, and I know you won't let me be harmed. Eleanor took my hand, moved, and agreed with a nod. Harris recorded everything with a precision that made me regain my breath. Pens scratched the paper as if tracing a new map of my life. I was not only signing documents but making a promise to myself. I would no longer be a shadow waiting for my own end. When we left the office, the sky was pale and the wind sharper. That was when I felt a strange shiver, as if something watched us from a blind spot on the street. I looked back, and for an instant, I swear I saw a dark sedan parked across the way, its windshield reflecting the building. The car seemed familiar. I blinked. Perhaps the cold was playing tricks. On the way home, Eleanor noticed my silence. Are you all right? I think I saw a car like Richard's. He has no way of knowing, she said, more to reassure me than with certainty. We arrived home, and I invited her in for tea. While the kettle hissed, my whole body stiffened. The phone rang. I answered, "Mother." Richard's voice sliced the line with a calculated calm. "Where were you this morning?" I called and no one answered. I looked at Eleanor, who had stopped mid-step in the kitchen. I swallowed hard. "I went to the market. I needed flour and eggs." "The market?" he repeated with a short laugh. "The market doesn't open so early on Mondays, Mother. At least not the one on Main Street." A chill ran down my neck. He was testing me. "I went to the corner bakery then," I added softly. "And I stopped by the library. I needed to return a book." There was a pause. It was like hearing his thoughts skim the edge of my lie. "I see. We need to talk. I'll come by tonight." The call ended, and the kettle screamed like a trapped shout. Eleanor put a hand on my shoulder. "Stand firm. You are not alone." The afternoon dragged. I prepared the house and turned on a lamp in the living room, set the table, not out of kindness but strategy. I wanted everything to appear normal. When night came, I saw headlights sweep across the living room wall. The same dark sedan stopped at the gate. Richard entered without ceremony, immaculate, the strong cologne filling the air like a warning. "Good evening, Mother." "Good evening, Richard." "Tea?" "No, thank you." He looked around as if inspecting a territory. "Busy day." I sat in the armchair, my hands in my lap. "I did some errands, as usual." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His face was serious, but his eyes glittered with something that made me shiver. "Funny. I was downtown early this morning. I swear I saw someone entering Mr. Harris's office." "That lawyer of his?" I thought, what a coincidence. Then I told myself I must be mistaken. But now... He let the sentence fade, studying my reaction. My breathing was shallow, but I kept my voice steady. "Many clients go to Mr. Harris, Richard. He's a respected man." He leaned back on the sofa, a barely visible smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Mother, we don't have to play each other. I only want what's best. If you're planning something, I'd like to be involved. Transparency, you know?" The word transparency sounded like cold iron. He wanted information, not to protect me, but to control the board. "I have the right to seek advice," I answered. "And I have the right to keep my privacy." Richard drummed his fingers on the sofa arm, annoyed. "Privacy is one thing, suspicion another. You're hiding something, Mother?" I looked at him. For the first time I allowed him to see a fragment of the new Margaret, the one who had signed papers of protection and who, though trembling inside, knew how to stand up. "I am protecting myself," I said. "And yes, you gave me reasons for that." The silence that followed was heavy as drying cement. He rose, straightened his tie, and walked to the window. The glass showed back a man I barely recognized. Tight jaw, narrowed eyes, something dark passing behind the pupils. "If you keep going down this path, you'll regret it," he said without turning. "Old people are sometimes influenced by meddlesome neighbors, by greedy lawyers. I'm worried that someone is confusing your head." The threat was like a thread of sweet poison. I stood slowly, leaning on the cane I rarely used, more symbol than necessity. I walked to the door and opened it. "This is my home, and while I am alive it will be ruled by my wishes. If you're concerned, you should ask yourself why." He stared at me long and heavy, then passed through me. At the threshold he paused. "Last chance, Mother. Do you want me to help you organize things, or would you prefer to find out the hard way?" I closed the door without answering. My knees trembled, but paradoxically my heart was calm. I knew I had crossed a point of no return, and he knew it too. Later, when the house finally fell quiet, I noticed an envelope slipped under the door. Inside, only a grainy printed photograph. Eleanor and I entering the red brick building. On the back, in pen, the single word, transparency. My blood ran cold. It was not just suspicion, it was surveillance. I sat at the table and called Eleanor to tell her. "We'll increase precautions," she said. "I'll come back with you to Mr. Harris early tomorrow. He needs to know this." That night I wrote in the diary with steady letters. "He is following me. He wants to intimidate me." But with every threat, my decision becomes stone. Tomorrow I will tell Harris that we will proceed with everything. And if Richard wants war, let him know. I will not be the one to lower my eyes first. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and listened to the house breathe. The wind whistled through the cracks like an old secret. I wrapped myself in the blanket and let the fear settle into a small corner while courage took a seat at the head of the bed. I had a plan in motion. Richard had urgency and eyes everywhere. The lines had been drawn, and somewhere between laws, memories, and shattered affections, a twist was already beginning to take shape. The next morning was gloomy, covered by heavy clouds that seemed to herald a storm. I woke with the photo still lying on my nightstand, a cruel reminder that Richard not only suspected me, but was already watching me. The cold paper between my fingers was proof that he had crossed yet another line. I placed the photo in my bag, took a deep breath, and called Eleanor. "He knows. He's following me." "Then we need to go to Mr. Harris today," she replied, her voice unwavering. When we arrived at the office, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Richard's dark sedan was already parked out front. My heart raced. Eleanor gripped my arm tightly. "Let's go in. You are not alone." We climbed the steps, and there he was, standing in the lobby, immaculate in his suit. The smile on his lips was cold, cutting. "Mother, what a coincidence." "Richard, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I could ask you the same. But it's no longer a secret that you've been coming to this office." His eyes shifted to Eleanor. "And bringing advisors with you." Before I could respond, Mr. Harris appeared at the doorway, his expression stern. "Mr. Thompson, if you came here to intimidate your mother, know that this office will not allow it." Richard laughed, a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the lobby. "Intimidate? I only want transparency. After all, we're talking about the inheritance that will inevitably be mine." My blood boiled. My hands trembled, not from fear but from indignation. I stepped forward. "Inheritance is not a guaranteed right, Richard. It's a legacy, and legacy is earned through love and respect, not impatience and greed." He looked at me as though I were a stubborn child. "Mother, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sign the papers. Sell the house. We can end this nonsense." That was when I pulled the photo from my bag and held it up before him. "You followed me, Richard. You photographed me. Do you want to make me a prisoner in my own life?" His smile vanished, and for a moment I saw the mask fall away. The man standing before me was no longer my son. He was a stranger, willing to do anything to achieve his goal. Harris stepped in firmly. "Mrs. Thompson, as your attorney, I assure you that Mr. Richard will have no access to any confidential documents. We've already initiated the legal filings. If he continues this behavior, we will involve the court." Richard took a deep breath, clenched his fists, but said nothing. The tension was thick in the air, almost tangible. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I let him see all the strength I had carried in silence for weeks. "Richard, today I will finalize my will. And hear this from me. You will not inherit anything by default. If you want something, you will have to prove that you deserve it." He was speechless. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of shock and fury, as if he had never imagined that his old mother could stand against him in such a way. At that moment, I realized the game had turned. I was no longer the frail woman he believed he could control. I was Margaret Thompson, and I had just built a wall between us, a wall he could not easily tear down. That afternoon, Mr. Harris led us into his office. The corridor felt longer than ever, and each step I took echoed inside me like a forewarning. When I entered, I felt the weight of the moment. The sun poured through the tall window, casting golden beams across the polished wooden desk, as if the very light wished to witness what was about to happen. Eleanor, steadfast as always, sat at my side. She discreetly squeezed my hand, transmitting a silent courage that held me upright. On the other side, Richard remained standing against the wall. His arms were crossed, his jaw locked tight, his body a statue of tension. His gaze, hard as stone, seemed to slice through the air. Harris adjusted his glasses, opened the folder calmly, and said in a solemn tone, "Mrs. Thompson, the time has come to formalize your wishes. Are you ready?" I swallowed hard. My hand trembled slightly as I held the pen, but inside me something pulsed with strength. I drew a deep breath and answered firmly, "Yes, I want every line to reflect exactly what I have decided." The lawyer began dictating the terms. With every word, I felt Richard shifting impatiently. I signed the documents one by one, and with each signature, I was not only completing legal clauses, but writing proof that I still had a voice, that I would not be silenced by greed. Before my son's eyes, I made the conditional will official. Richard would only have access to a small portion of the estate if he fulfilled obligations of care and companionship, verified by impartial parties. The remainder would be directed to the donation fund supporting the town's library and the nursing home, in memory of Thomas and of our family. Finally, power of attorney would rest with Eleanor, the only person I trusted with my life. When I placed the pen down on the desk, a heavy silence fell upon us. The air itself seemed too dense to breathe. Richard uncrossed his arms in a violent motion and stepped forward. His face was red, his eyes blazing like embers about to set everything aflame. "This is absurd," he shouted. "How can you leave everything to strangers and institutions?" "I am your son, Mother." The word son pierced me inside, but I did not falter. I lifted my chin and met his eyes with every ounce of firmness I could gather. "A son is one who honors the life he was given. You have not done that, Richard. All you've spoken of is money. Not once have you asked if I was well, if I was lonely, if I needed affection. To you, I am nothing more than an inheritance with an expiration date." He slammed his hand on the desk so hard the papers trembled, some nearly falling to the floor. "You will regret this. I will not accept it." At that moment, Harris rose, his presence carrying an authority that filled the room. "Mr. Thompson, this is your mother's legitimate will. Any attempt to coerce her will be recorded as a crime. If you do not respect this, you will answer before the law." Richard stared at me for a long moment. It was as if two worlds collided in that gaze. The mother who had loved him unconditionally, and the man who now saw her only as an obstacle. In his eyes I saw hatred, disbelief, and something worse still, contempt. "If it's war you want, Mother, then war you shall have," he said, spitting the words like venom. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered for minutes, like thunder trapped between the walls. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Eleanor squeezed my hand tenderly, breaking the void. "You were brave, Margaret, but now we must be prepared. You won't give up." I breathed deeply, my heart still racing. For the first time in a long while, there were no tears in my eyes. There was pain, yes, but something new too, pride. I had made my decision, and nothing, not even the fury of my own son, could erase it. In that moment, I understood that I had taken a step from which there was no turning back. And even if the path ahead was harsh, I was no longer alone. That night, after Richard's outburst at the office, I returned home accompanied by Eleanor. The silence in the car was heavy, but in my heart there was a strange serenity. I had signed the papers, made my decision official, and for the first time in weeks, I felt I had regained control over my own life. But I also knew Richard would not leave things as they were. I recognized the look in his eyes. It wasn't sadness nor hurt, but the gaze of someone who felt defeated and was ready to strike back. When I entered the house, I walked to the shelf and picked up my diary. With steady hands, I wrote, "Today I gave Richard the answer he never expected. He sees me as fragile, but he discovered I still have a voice. I know he won't give up, but neither will I." That same night, around midnight, I heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of my house. I rose slowly, drew the curtain aside, and saw Richard's dark sedan parked under the dim glow of the street lamp. He didn't get out. He just sat there, engine off, like a shadow watching. My heart pounded, but I refused to give in to panic. I went to the kitchen, prepared a cup of tea, and sat in the armchair. If he wanted to intimidate me, he would not have the satisfaction of seeing my fear. The next morning, I received an unexpected visit from Harris. He knocked on the door early, carrying a folder thicker than before. "Mrs. Thompson," he said as he stepped inside, "after your son's reaction, I decided to accelerate the process. Just yesterday I filed everything with the court. It is now official and protected by law. Richard will not be able to contest it easily." I breathed in relief. Eleanor, who had arrived shortly after, smiled and squeezed my hand. "You've won, Margaret." But inside me, I knew there was still one final piece missing. Richard would not give up because of papers alone. He needed to be shown that a true legacy was not in possessions, but in choices. So that afternoon, I asked Harris to help me organize something symbolic. A public letter, notarized, to be read on the day of my funeral. In it, I explained my reasons, my pain, and above all, my hope that Richard would one day find redemption. But I also left an unexpected detail. A small sum, not in cash, but in a community fund that would carry his name. The condition was clear. He could only access it if he actively worked at the nursing home for at least 2 years. When Harris looked at me surprised, I answered, "If my son only sees me for my inheritance, then let him learn that love and responsibility also have a price. If he wants something, he will have to give care in return." That evening I called Richard to talk. He arrived suspicious, his expression still hard. "What do you want now, Mother?" he asked, crossing his arms. I looked him in the eyes and spoke calmly. "I want you to know that your life is no longer tied to what you will receive from me. I've done my part. I've protected my memory, honored what I built with your father, and left my legacy to this town. But I also left one chance for you, Richard. If you want it, you may inherit it, not in easy money, but in responsibility. You will have to care for others, as you never cared for me." He stared at me, stunned. For the first time, I saw something break in his expression. It wasn't love nor immediate regret, but a crack in his pride, as if he had realized that his mother, the one he thought fragile, had been far wiser than he could have imagined. "You can't force me to do this. I can't force you, but I can choose. And I have chosen, Richard." He left without another word. The gate slammed behind him, but inside me there was peace. That night, before bed, I wrote my final entry for that chapter in my diary. Today I finally understood that love cannot be begged for nor bought. Richard will have to decide who he wants to be. The son I always dreamed of, or the man greed has turned him into. My role is finished. Now it is his. I closed the diary, turned off the light, and for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep without fear.